Listen, with faint dry sound, like steps of passing ghosts, the leaves, frost crisped, break from the trees and fall. That is the opener to our November edition of the newsletter. That's by Adelaide Crapsey. Unfortunate last name, but we'll give her the pass. That's from a poem entitled November Night, which, how appropriate. It's November. Now, we'll just go through the newsletter together, section by section, starting with the painting of the month, okay? It's On the Path by Ludwig Munthe, who was German, I think, but born in Sweden, something like that. A lot of his stuff was landscape paintings, but I couldn't find too much more biographical information about him online. Anyways, a lot of his works are very beautiful, so there's a high-res scan of On the Path. Now, the poem of the month this month comes from William Wilfred Campbell, who was a Canadian, okay? And I'm happy to highlight a Canadian author, poet, painter, whatever I can. So, very nice. Thank you, William Wilfred Campbell. Now, this poem is entitled How One Winter Came in the Lake Region. Now, November, where I live, Canada, normally the month where the first snow arrives, so also very seasonally appropriate. Now, it's a bit of a longer poem this month. I usually don't do quite so many stanzas. Usually I crop it, but I put the full thing in there because I like it. Now, I will just read to you the last stanza, but I encourage you to read the whole thing. The last stanza goes like this. That night I felt the winter in my veins, a joyous tremor of the icy glow, and woke to hear the north's wild vibrant strains, while far and wide, by withered woods and plains, fast fell the driving snow. The quote of the month this month comes from a guy named Novalis. Now, Novalis is a pen name. His real name is a bit of a mouthful. I have it pulled up here. It's George Philipp Friedrich Feier von Hardenberg. He was probably 12 or 13 by the time he could spell that. Now, Novalis really is a kind of a seminal figure in the emergence of the German Romantic movement. Now, Romanticism arises during the 18th or 17th, 18th century, really as a reaction against Classicism. Now, Classicism is the idea of like proportion, order, reason, simplicity, really drawing heavy iconography and imagery from ancient and classical Greece and Rome. Romanticism is very kind of the opposite. It has to do with the individual, has to do with feelings, emotions, dreams, and a lot of the iconography comes instead from like medieval times, not Greece and Rome. Now, Novalis, he has this idea that I don't really understand about magical idealism, right? Where he's trying to like re-enchant everyday life, because he feels like it's been disenchanted by these ideas of reason and science that have kind of reduced everything to a material cause. And that those ideas really come to the fore in this quote that I've chosen. He says, I think this quote is from one of his journals. He says, "To romanticize the world is to make us aware of the magic, mystery, and wonder of the world. It is to educate the senses to see the ordinary as extraordinary, the familiar as strange, the mundane as sacred, the finite as infinite." When I read that quote for the first time, it reminded me of this tweet I had seen, where it said something along the lines of, like, if you were to go to the grocery store without your preconceived notions, without expecting what you're going to see there, I think maybe it's like the goggles of habit or something. If you were to go to the grocery store without all these preconceived notions, you would like go through the doors and you like jump with joy at like just the abundance of like food and like the choices and like how nice everything is. And I think that like that childlike sense of like wonder and awe at just like normal everyday things is kind of what he's getting at here. Maybe he wasn't thinking about the grocery store, but anyways, it applies. The short story of the month is, shameless plug, it's a chapter from the novel I'm serializing. This chapter, we get more lore and background on Atlantis, how it falls, the founding of Nebaton, and a bit more of the background on the life trees, and how that connects to kind of the mythology of Atlantis. And Kian finds a copper nail where it shouldn't be, and the plot thickens. Okay, so I'd say go and read it, but you'd have to read all the previous chapters too. So maybe if you have a spare hour, you can go back and read all the previous chapters. Anyways, moving on to the word of the month. The word of this month is bistro. Now, you've definitely heard this word before, right? A small restaurant, maybe a French setting. Now, this term doesn't really come into use until 1814. Now, the story I'm about to tell you is considered folklore. It's not official etymology, but oftentimes folklore is like more true than what's in the history textbooks. So we're going to go with it. So imagine this, okay? Napoleon is kind of at the height of his power, but he's making some mistakes, okay? He tries to invade Russia in the winter. Now, he doesn't really care so much about Russia. He really wants to take over Britain. But Britain's an island, and Britain has naval superiority, okay? They're just better at sea than anybody. And so Napoleon's like, okay, I can't take the channel because they're just too good on boats. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to starve their supply lines. No one on the continent of Europe is going to trade with Britain. It's kind of like a siege. We're going to starve them out. But of course, everyone likes trading with Britain because it's profitable. So Napoleon's like, don't do that. And everyone's like, okay, but they still do it. So Napoleon gets mad. He's like, okay, we're going to march on Russia and force them to close their ports to Britain. So he's trying to invade. Winter comes. No surprise to anybody. If you know anything about war and history, you don't invade Russia in the winter. So his army suffers heavy casualties, heavy losses. It's reduced, I think, to like less than half of the troops that marched into Russia. He's limping back to France. Now, during this time, there's trouble brewing because a third coalition of European forces has formed, and they're kind of getting ready to put an end to this Napoleon guy. He's getting too much power. Napoleon gets wind of this, though, and he's like, okay, let's go for the Hail Mary. Let's cut off this new coalition's supply lines before they can even form an attack. So he marches all of his wounded army to eastern France to cut off the supply lines to the coalition. The problem, though, is that this kind of leaves Paris undefended. It's relatively vulnerable. And the allies of the coalition are like, big brain moment, let's attack Paris. And so they do that, and Napoleon tries to recover. There's a few skirmishes. There's the Battle of Paris. To no avail, okay? Paris is occupied by the coalition, and so you have all of these non-French troops kind of walking and parading themselves through the town. Now, some of these troops are Russian, okay? And they think they're top dogs. They're kind of swaggering around. They go to cafes, and, they want to be served quickly because they are the winning team. So they kind of snap their fingers and they say the Russian word for quickly, serve me quickly, which is bistro, bistro. And over time, the term kind of sticks, right? And that's where we get the idea of bistro. Now, I don't know what the official etymology story behind that word is, but whatever it is, it's nowhere near as good as the story I just told you. So we're going to go with that. Now, the book recommendation of the month, bit of a caveat. I always try to do something accessible, okay? I want to recommend classics to people, which means you might scoff at my recommendation and say, that's not like an unknown book. Everyone knows that book. Yes, but have you actually read it, though? For most people, the answer is no. So I will continue to recommend books you've maybe perhaps heard of before. I make no claim to esoteric recommendations, but just another voice saying, hey, actually read the classics that you know about. Anyways, I've done a few novels the past few months. Now I want to do some poetry. Now, a small note on poetry. Most people, like average everyday people, they might, have a small brush with poetry because they listen to music, right? There's lyrics in songs, and song lyrics are indeed poetry. But they don't really think that written poetry that's not set to music has really anything to offer them. And oftentimes they might try to read a poem, but maybe it doesn't make sense to them. And they try to uncover what they think that the poem is just flowery language to disguise narrative. Like they read poetry like prose. And so they get confused if they can't unlock the poem. But that's not what I want you to do. When you read a poem, your primary goal should be to just dwell on the associations and images the poem evokes. And then once you have a little bit more of poetic instinct, then you can try to uncover the author's intention of why they're trying to write the poem. But yeah, you don't need to decode or understand the poem to enjoy it. That all being said, okay, I think a very easy and fun introduction to poetry is William Blake's Songs of Innocence and of Experience. You can read them free online. There's a link in the newsletter. You have no excuse. And they're all short, and anyways. Okay, the song that I'm recommending to you this month is called Dito's Lament. Okay, now you might probably have heard of the famous Latin epic by Virgil called the Aeneid. Okay, now in the Aeneid, this is happening after the fall of Troy. So you have this guy named Aeneas, and he is Aeneas. I don't know how to say it properly. Let's go with Aeneas. He is leading the very few bedraggled group of survivors after the fall of Troy in search of a new home. Okay, so they get on the boats and they start looking for a new place to live. They don't have a lot of success. They're out at sea for 6 years, and then finally one day a severe storm blows them into North Africa, into a city called Carthage. They land there. They kind of maybe trying to regroup and recoup, and before they set out again. But Aeneas meets the Queen of Carthage, Dido, and they fall in love. And they kind of start talking, long term. We're going to get married. There's two actually benefits to Aeneas marrying Dido. The first being that Aeneas can kind of secure his power, right? He's going to become king if he marries the queen. And secondly, he will have found a home for the Trojans, right? North Africa, Carthage can be their new home. But it's not going to be all this smooth sailing, okay? So I'm not sure if this actually happens in the Aeneid, but in Nahum Tate's 1688 version, which I think is meant to be, an opera, there's some conspiracy going on. So an evil sorceress sends like an elf to kind of break up the two lovebirds. So this elf disguises itself, I don't know if it's a guy or girl, an elf, disguises itself as the god Mercury. Now, of course, Aeneas, being Greek, has like very high regard for the will of the gods, right? And so this elf, disguised as god Mercury, convinces Aeneas that actually, I know I keep saying Aeneas, I keep messing it up. That's my bad, okay. Aeneas, he convinces Aeneas that the gods are unhappy with him, because actually Carthage is not the place where the new Trojan home will be. Instead, it should be on Latin soil, right, somewhere in Italy. And so he's like, you got to keep going. You got to keep looking. This isn't it. And so Aeneas is kind of he's torn between Dido, who he loves, and his duty to the gods. So he's kind of torn in between these two things that he wants to do. So he kind of reluctantly kind of packs the ships, gets ready to go, and right before he leaves, Dido kind of meets with him and is like, what's going on? Like, I thought we had something. And he's like, you are so right. My bad. I'm not going to go. Let's get married. And then Dido has the biggest fumble of all time, okay? She goes, you thought of leaving me? We're done. She still loves him, but like she's like acting all coy, and like honestly I don't even know why she does this, okay? Maybe she's like hoping that he'll like say like, no, I still love you, which he does, but then she doubles down. She's like, no, leave. Nope, I don't want you anymore, leave. So he's like, bro, okay, I guess. So he sadly like gets in his ship and sails away, and then as Dido is watching him sail away, she like starts to die of heartache. And she sings this really sad song called Dito's Lament, or When I Am Laid in Earth. And then after she finishes singing the song, she dies. And you can listen to this song. I have a link in the newsletter. I'll try to remember to put it in the description. But yeah, it is opera, fair warning. But I don't like opera, and this song is good. So maybe give it a shot. It's short, like 3 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Lastly, in the newsletter, we have our writing tip of the month, and that is the idea that perfect is the enemy of good. Okay, now I haven't read this book, but there's this anecdote from Ted Orland's Art and Fear, where he poses the following scenario, okay? So you have a ceramics teacher, and he divides the class into two groups. On this side, he takes all the half the students, and he says, I'm going to grade you on how many pots you make. So if you make 50 pounds, you get an A, 40 pounds, B. There you go. Half the students over here, he says, I'm grading you on quality. I only want you to hand in one pot. And if it's like a really well-made pot, you get an A. If it's decent, you get a B, so on. So the teacher kind of goes away, comes back at the end of the term, and he's like, okay, let's start grading. And who do you think has better pots? Quantity or quality? Now, intuitively, quality has better pots because they tried to make quality pots. Like, that's obvious. But no, actually, the group that went for quantity, their final pots are actually better than the pots that the quality group made. And the reason for that, although it's counterintuitive, is that they went through the entire creative process more times. So they learned, what are the shortcomings? Like, what are my weaknesses? What are the hardest parts? How do I, like, they practiced that whole process more often. And so they actually got better. Now, I found a few other quotes from other artists of a similar idea, okay? So here's one from Robert Watson Watt, who I actually don't know who that is, but he says, "Give them the third best to go with. The second best comes too late. The best never comes." Margaret Atwood, "If I waited for perfection, I would never write a word." Jodi Picoult, who I think is more of a contemporary author, "You can always edit a bad page. You can't edit a blank page." Okay, so the idea is that don't let your desire to make up something perfect interfere with making anything at all, right? It's better you just do it than you do it perfect, which is sometimes a hard reminder. Yeah. Anyways, that's the newsletter from this month. Thanks for watching, listening, reading, and subscribe now to get December edition, which I already started working on. It's going to be good. Okay, thanks. See you soon.